we talked about order and chaos. In connection with that, I'd like to briefly talk about the ultimate chaos for the body and the form identity that you are here on the horizontal dimension. And of course, no matter what you achieve here in the world of form, physical forms, you're moving towards ultimate dissolution of the physical body and most likely the psychological entity also. So let's, death, by the way, it's called death. It's important to familiarize yourself with death. You can't really live in a wise way if you are not familiar with death. They go together. You may remember I mentioned how in a forest, death and life go together. One can't exist without the other. So-called death, which is chaos and order always, depend on each other. From the point of view of the physical vehicle and your form identity, one could say that every one of us is infected with a lethal virus already, but it's not a physical virus. The virus is called time. And in the end, it will consume you and destroy you. That's for sure. So the outcome is already assured. It will kill you unless something else kills you first, which could be an accident, the seeming solidity of our world is an illusion. Especially in the Western world, the denial of death has been prevalent for a long time. Not so in medieval times, but since we moved into modern times. In medieval times, in the Western world, Europe, humans were very much aware of death. It was all around them. Life was very unpredictable, more so than now, although nowadays it's also unpredictable, as we are seeing. But in medieval times, even more so, of course, so death could come at any moment. And you can see in old paintings, medieval paintings, many people on their desk or table, they had a skull, a human skull, to remind them of death. Because if you're aware of death, everything else, you have a different perspective on everything else. If you had, for example, if you were aware continuously of mortality, short-lived nature of the individual life form, perhaps nothing would be that all-consuming and serious anymore. If you knew any dispute or disagreement or scandals, and if you knew if you have a dispute with somebody, if you remembered in a few years we'll both be dead, somehow you rise above it a little bit. This lethal virus called time, unless something else kills you first, traffic accident in which, as I mentioned, every year 1,250,000 people die, many of them young. Many people in the Western world die of drugs, overdoses of drugs, which are connected with unhappiness and despair, and finding something to mitigate the unhappiness and despair or lifelessness they feel, and then they are drawn to drugs, and then it kills them. They don't know who they are, they haven't gone deeper, nobody has taught them all the most vital things are not taught to young people. And so this time virus then eventually kills you. Everybody who is here with us will be killed by this virus. It will, maximum 80 years, I suppose, from now on. Probably less. Certainly, in my case, less. So mortality has been a taboo in the West for a long time, ever since medieval ages came to an end. In other parts of the world, death is not yet a taboo, it's still on open display, such as in India, where the dead bodies are cremated out in the open. Anybody can come and watch dead bodies being burned and carried through the streets and then being burned. That gives you more of a sense of reality, because if you deny death, you get a distorted view of things. And not only the West deny death, even old age. Most old people are now in senior residences, as they are called, whereas in other countries still you see they are out in the street. As I told the story of the Buddha, when he saw old people, sick people, and a dead body, then that was the beginning of his awakening, of his search. So in particular at this time, people that you know may die before their time, some. Others may already have been approaching old age, death, and then through this illness they die just a little bit sooner. So it's important to face death, not kind of think about it in a morbid way, but to face it, the fact of it, the inevitability of it, and to see that it's very important, spiritually too, to be aware of the short-lived nature of all life forms. One of the essential teachings of the Buddha is the fact of impermanence. Fear, a lot of the fear that people feel, yes, there's fear of loss, but deep down, perhaps it could all be traced to fear of death. Because a fear of loss, if you fear of losing your job or fear of losing somebody close to you, well, that's death that's happening to somebody else. Or you have a fear of loss of job, loss of your savings, loss of home, whatever it may be. Do you fear a kind of loss, a diminishment of through these things? And so these are little deaths. When you lose something that was important to you, there's a little death there. Now I want to face death and talk about death just briefly, without necessarily giving you too much or anything to believe in. Of course, it's great if you have some people believe, of course, death is, many people in Western world especially, but increasingly the East too, believe, of course, death is the end of everything, the end of you, because life, including human life, they believe, and that's still, of course, a mainstream belief, is an accident. Accidentally, these atoms and molecules have come together. The whole of life is an accidental conglomeration of atoms, total chance event. There's nothing behind it. That's the belief. There's nothing transcendent. The entire universe, the apparent harmony of everything, the amazing life forms and everything is just a chance event. Or as Shakespeare put it, well, he wasn't referring to that, but that is the modern view. A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. A dreadful view of life. And of course, because that even those humans who have not done any philosophical investigations for themselves, they have all absorbed it because it's in the mainstream culture, that belief of nothing there, chance events. You are basic meaning, complete meaning. There's no meaning. Any meaning they believe is it's a fabrication. There is no meaning to the universe. There's no underlying dimension. I believe, of course, these are grave errors, but that is the mainstream belief. And then there are some religious people who still believe that they have their own forms of belief of life after death. And perhaps they are a little bit better off than those who believe that there's absolutely nothing, it's all chance, there's no transcendent meaning to human life or any life. But for most, it's still, even the religious people, for most, it's a belief, it's a conceptual idea in their head. It can perhaps free them a little bit from the fear of death, but I don't know how much. So I don't want to talk in terms of belief, so that in order to go beyond the fear of death, if that is possible, is there another way rather than the belief that there is something? Mark Twain, the writer, said something quite amusing, a little bit profound, but is amusing. He said something like, I don't fear death at all, he said. Before I was born, I had already been dead for millions of years and not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. It's an interesting thought that you've already been, before you were born, you're dead for millions of years. Was that so bad? Well, that's one way of freeing yourself from the fear of death, but I don't know how deep that goes. But I want to go a little deeper. If you can sense that the essential you is not a visible entity, who you are essentially cannot be found in the realm of physicality. If it could be found in the realm of physicality, then a surgeon could open your brain and find you there. Or find your memories, whatever, find your thoughts, who you are. But you are not there. You can't find a single thought because thought does not exist in the realm of physicality. In fact, science has no idea, no matter what they say. Basic truth is the ego doesn't allow scientists to say that they don't know. They find it hard to say they don't know. But the basic fact is science has no idea what consciousness is. Many scientists avoid the word altogether because they don't know what to do with it. Certainly there's a relationship between the physical brain and consciousness, but they believe that the physical brain produces consciousness as a byproduct of physicality. But that's all they can say. But they don't know even what a thought is. Where is it? How does a thought survive in you for decades? Memories, thousands, hundreds of thousands of memories survive in you. I can remember the most crazy, insignificant things people have said to me 40 years ago. Still, so many things are there. Where are they? The entire you, who you are in your essence is not, you're invisible. That's the realization. You're essentially invisible. If you can sense that essentially who you are is an invisible presence that kind of inhabits the body, not as a belief. I believe that I'm an immortal soul. That would be an old term. That's a belief, so I don't want to go there. But an immediate realization or sensing, and don't you call it anything. Well, you have to call it something if you talk about it, but not perhaps terms that have been in use for very long and misunderstood. If you can sense that you are, so to speak, this is not entirely correct because the moment when we use language, we distort things and falsify things. It's in the nature of language, especially if we talk about something that's not part of the physical realm, because language is here to reflect the physical realm. So when we talk about the non-physical realm, we still use language, but it becomes more and more problematic the deeper we go. Jesus used, and other spiritual teachers used continuously parables, which means they used words from the physical realm to mean something else, so that people, because they have no words for that something else, that's why Jesus had to use, for example, what we read, the parable about the man building a house on the rock and another man building the house on the sand. That's a parable. He uses words from the physical realm that people know, but they point to something else that is non-physical. The rock is nothing physical. He used that because that's how language works. It reflects the physical. This, what you can see in a mirror, what you can touch, is not who you are. And it obviously, you could cut it open and then you would see, what would you see? You would see blood. It's like, what is it, 70% water or something like that. You would see tissue, bones, and all kinds of organs which have different functions. Are you there somewhere? Even in the brain, are you there? What does it mean, you? What does it mean, I? When you say I, can you sense that the essential you, who you are essentially, is invisible? And memory doesn't help you there, because whatever you can memorize about yourself is part of the form identity, the person. And that's not who you are, it's just a memory. But right now, in this moment, can you sense the essence of who you are as an invisible presence that pervades the entire body, but goes beyond it too? The mind has to become still for a moment so that your attention can move there. But your attention and it are actually a single thing. And again, there's a very still presence there. And even if you only have glimpses of it, then you have a kind of direct experience of who or what you are beyond the physical body. If you are very strongly identified with the physical body, then it might be more difficult. If you have a very strong, your identity is mainly derived from the physicality, which happens to some people, particular people who are very proud of their body or very unhappy with their body, either extreme. If you're proud of your body, derive your sense of self from it because it looks better than other people's. Your appearance and the body, it's fine, it's a limitation. Appreciating if you're lucky enough to have a great body, it's wonderful. But is that all to who you are? And then, of course, time, the virus that you have is eventually going to make your body less beautiful. It's going to consume it. And then if you had been very much identified with the physical body, you get unhappy because your sense of identity suffers, gets diminished, and you don't want to look in the mirror anymore. Or you seek some external repair job. For a few years that works, until it doesn't. So this sensing of yourself as an invisible presence, even if you only have it occasionally, can free you to some extent from the fear of death. That presence is timeless. You don't remember it. It's nothing to do with memory. It's nothing to do with what you have achieved as a person here, whether you're a big failure or a big success. It's irrelevant. It's nothing to do with your future. It's just so comforting to know that deeper self is beyond the decay of the body. Now the question arises, well, what happens to it when the body dissolves? Wait and see. I don't want to give you too many ideas to believe in. But at least there's something there that is not subject to time, because let's say you are 20 years now and you can sense that. When you're 90 years old, you can still sense that, and it's the same. And then you're less fearful or no longer fearful of your own death, which will come either when you're old or sooner, or the death of other people around you or wherever they are. Then you can see that death on one level is very sad and tragic, and on another level it's the most natural thing in the world. And part of life. And then when somebody dies close to you, you can cry or weep and at the same time feel that which is beyond death in you, which must be the same as that which is beyond death in that person who died. One could go so far as to say, nothing ever dies, nothing real ever dies, there's only the metamorphosis of forms, the continuous birth and death of forms, life forms, bodies. So you can be sad when somebody dies, or you may be sad that even when people die that you don't know. And at the same time, these two levels. On one level, death is tragic. On a higher or deeper level, it's natural and not tragic at all. And the two can coexist in you at the same time. I experienced it when my mother died. I cried, and yet I felt a great peace underneath it. If the peace could have spoken, it probably would have said, there is no death, only forms die. But it was just peace, he didn't say anything. And then a few months later my dad died, and they didn't even live together. And then the same thing happened again. I don't know if you've heard of, there's a famous spiritual book. It's called A Course in Miracles. A book of spiritual instruction written in, can't remember when it was written, maybe in the 60s, 70s, by a psychology professor at Columbia University in New York. But it was channeled, it wasn't written by her as such. She heard an inner dictation, and it's as long as the Bible. Some people love it, others don't like it because it uses Christian terminology, and some people are happy with that and others are not. So it's not for everybody. However, I believe it's a wonderful book if you can look beyond terminologies. But at the very beginning of the book, and this is exactly relevant to what we've been speaking about, there is a few words, just a few words, and that these words encapsulate the entire teaching of the book. and it's just a few words. If you understand those words, you don't need to read the book. It becomes redundant. And the words are, they sound a little enigmatic, but perhaps a little less enigmatic after our little talk just now. It says, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That's it. Now, if you understand that, then you got it. It's no need to read 1,000 pages. Nothing real can be threatened. So what is it that can be threatened? Well, of course the body can be threatened. Everything in this physical realm can be threatened, is subject to destruction and decay. Nothing real can be threatened. So is there something that, if it can't be threatened, then it's not part of the physicality of what we perceive as the physical universe. Nothing unreal exists. In ultimate terms, and that's not just, of course, in miracles, it's in all Indian spiritual philosophy and so on. In ultimate terms, the entire universe is a kind of dream, a dream of the universal mind. You are part of the dream of the universal mind. Everything is a dream of the universal mind, where it's going, and then the universal mind, my suggestion is gradually awakening. It's becoming more conscious. But let's not go all the way. I could talk about that for hours. Let's not go that way. It would become philosophy and speculative philosophy and so on. Not necessary. But nothing unreal exists. So only what is real exists. Nothing unreal actually exists. Herein lies the peace of God, means in knowing that lies the peace of God. And what is the peace of God? Now why did they bring in God suddenly? Herein lies the peace of God. In this realization lies a deep peace that is knowing the source of all life, which is God. The peace of God is not peace that is derived from some circumstance or something. Just happy circumstances that give you peace. No, the peace of God is a realization of ultimately who you are in your essence. And who you are in your essence is one with what the universe is in its essence. That is the peace of God. And then you can relax and say, okay. But not as a belief, it's that you know that this is all fine, but there's something beyond that. And I'm part of that which is beyond. So you might say then, as I say, well, I wouldn't mind in the realm of time, could live a few more years, maybe. Perhaps continue to be a channel for consciousness coming into this world. But if that's not to be, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. Now, most people believe you need more time because they believe time will eventually enable them to find themselves, a fuller version of themselves. So the worst thing you can do to a person is to remove time from them. And so you have no more time. And that happens, for example, when you have an illness and you go to a doctor and the doctor says, well, maybe 6 weeks. You have 6 weeks. It's virtually nothing. And that would be devastating for most, especially, of course, if you're completely identified with this personality and the form. You've never sensed anything beyond it. then it's awful, because he said, I'm not complete, I haven't. But then there have been cases, some I knew personally, who were told this, and they knew only a few months or a few weeks, and because time was removed from them, they suddenly accepted it. They didn't go into, oh my God, this. And suddenly they were lived completely in the present moment. Like a little child almost. And some people I had when I was still doing counseling sessions years ago, I had a couple of people independently who had virtually no time left, and they became enlightened beings, just the light of consciousness shining through them. And we just sat together a few times, and they kind of just looked at me. There was no person there anymore. The person was already gone. The person had already died. But the knowledge that I have no more time didn't give any food, any fuel to the person anymore. The personality just dissolved already. And what was left when the personality dissolved was just the consciousness behind the personality. So they were that pure consciousness shining through. And that is what you sense. You get a glimpse of when you sense within and feel that you are lived, that an invisible presence lives through you. And when the personality dies, which is the ego death, then of course, in some cases the personality dies before the body dies. And then that shines through, the consciousness shines through. And that's an amazing thing. In the Western world, the contemporary Western world, nobody knows what to do with that. There's no knowledge to refer to. Perhaps in more distant past, yes, they would have been recognized, they would have been called saints. Or in India, even nowadays, still more readily, they would have been recognized as holy men or women, because people would even just look at them and say, wow. But it doesn't matter whether they were recognized or not. They were not concerned with that. And time suddenly didn't matter anymore. What is it? Another 10, 20, 30 years, so what? No longer made any difference whatsoever, because they realized the essence of who they are, the total fulfillment of their lives. It doesn't matter how old they were. The destiny of humans is that realization. And whether it comes to you when you are shortly before you die at the age of 30, or shortly before you die at the age of 90, it doesn't matter. And of course, this is where the saying comes from, find death before death finds you. So that means that's the death of the personality. Now, here, what we are engaged in through the teaching and the practice is a gradual diminishment of the personality. Now, some of you, when you're confronted with death or death close to you and a situation involving death, it could be that suddenly your entire personality can also die. It could happen. And that it's a wonderful thing. It's the greatest thing that can happen to a human. In the meantime, it's quite enough that here, through the practice, there is a diminishment of you as a person. The person or the personality becomes somewhat less important and all-pervasive, because you begin to sense there is something beyond it. And that something beyond it is more essentially who you are than the person or the personality. And that something beyond it can shine through the personality as long as it's there. And then the personality is actually a much nicer personality, so to speak. It's not as obnoxious as most personalities. And it's not as such a problem maker like most personalities, when the other dimension is completely missing. Then without that, personalities are just a nuisance. You might have noticed. Now, with some people, you have that shining through. There are people who have never come into touch with any spiritual teaching, and it's happening in them for some other reason, triggered by something else, and that's perfectly fine. I've seen people, beggars in third world countries, in India, and people with a leg missing, an arm missing, and sitting by the roadside, and they look at you like they've already gone through the death. The personality was gone, because there was nothing for the personality to hang on to anymore. There's nothing there. What can I identify with? Of course, theoretically they could have a victim identity, poor me, and so on, but they didn't. So to have a deeper perspective on what's happening around you, because yes, so as we are experiencing this collective, in conventional terms, to use the old-fashioned word, calamity, you experience this right now, which is to gain a deeper perspective on it is very important. And no longer then you're no longer drawn into the hysterical, fear-mongering overreaction to it. And you are a light in this world. Your peace, because then there's some peace in you, you become a peace, because that presence that you sense is at peace. It is your connectedness with Source. And then you can do a lot of good in this world. Even just your presence does a lot of good, because you emanate a certain frequency. But of course, you probably will do than just be there, or there could be. You might speak to people, you may be active here or there to help, whatever you feel called upon to do, without that, you're no longer, now this is again the parable of the house built on the rock. Storms comes, the rains come, the storm comes, and the house is not swept away, the house is built on the rock. But the other house is ruined and collapses, which means without that deeper realization, certain events that are happening now are just devastating. Many people are just devastated by it. Especially if somebody close to you dies, or you might die, I may die, who knows? Devastated. But you're not devastated anymore. There could be the end of the world could happen, and you would still know nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Because the world, what we see as the world is, yes, one way of looking at it, you could say it's the dream of the universal mind. It's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is it's a surface phenomenon. Underneath it, there are vast energy movements, and there is an intelligence underlying it, and that's, we could say, to connect it with the other ways, the universal mind. Underneath it, there is a an intelligence energy field that expresses itself on the surface as the manifest life forms continuously. But the life forms are here. What lives through the life forms is the universal intelligence underneath the invisible energy field that is the organizing principle behind all phenomena that arise in this world. And that is an invisible energy field, in fact different energies, but all deriving from one energy and then separating into other. One energy field is the earth itself. The earth itself is a living being. It has an intelligence of its own. The earth itself is a manifestation of the universal mind, of the universal consciousness. And every human being on the earth is a manifestation of the universal consciousness connected with the earth. But the earth is not a dead thing. It's an energy, and this is why I will speak about this in more detail when I speak of climate change. But for now, just a brief mention. There were already, I mentioned the other day, there were already five extinctions on the planet, total chaos, chaotic, total eradication of, in some cases, 60, 70, even 90% of all life forms in this, I believe the second extinction, disappeared. And then how was it that each time out of nothing, the Earth regenerated itself with even more complex life forms? Because that which was the underlying intelligence is actually much greater than our limited human intelligence, and it is vast. It has a totally different view of time. So it then produced new life forms. It doesn't mean, well, I don't want to go into it now because we'll speak it, but just to know what applies to the Earth, applies to each human. Underlying it, there is an invisible energy field, and it holds the body together temporarily. The important thing is to be able to sense it. Then everything else, the world itself, is no longer seen as the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is unseen. So that frees you to some extent from the world, but you participate in it. There's an ancient Christian saying that is very beautiful, that points to a particular way of being in this world, and that is just, the saying is, to be in the world but not of it. That would be enlightened living. You are in the world, but you're not of the world. It shows the two dimensions. It's an ancient Christian saying, probably by, I don't know who first said it, probably Christianity had great mystics in the Middle Ages and before, to be in the world but not of it. And that really is for us, for you, to realize and to live, to be a helpful, beneficial presence in the world, but not realizing that your home is not in this realm. Your home, you can sense that. I like the English word home, H-O-M-E. What does that remind you of? The Indian Om, Om, O-M, Om. The sacred sound that points to the origin of all things. It could be either coincidence or it could be that they are connected, because would not be too surprising because the European languages are Indo-European languages. They have many of their words have roots in Sanskrit. So what we've been talking about is pointing to the possibility of being peaceful or at peace, even in the face of apparent disaster and death and so on. And it's sometimes only through the disaster that people find that dimension. Let's come to the end of our session today, and perhaps just a moment of still and alert presence. No need to think. There's nothing to think about. You don't add anything to this moment by thinking about it. Thank you.